My name is Gerald Chertavian. I'm the founder and CEO of an organization, national nonprofit organization called Year Up. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and how it fits into the changing landscape in and around higher education. 50 years ago, more than a million people marched in Washington. They marched from the Washington Monument through to the Lincoln Memorial. Their footsteps were heard throughout the entire world, and indeed they had implications for decades to come. What's interesting is if you look at the buttons that people wore on their chests on that day in August of 1963, the buttons didn't just say freedom. And those buttons, of which I have one that I bought off of eBay, actually said freedom and jobs. And so it was interesting, at the end of Martin Luther King's journey, he and the leaders of the civil rights movement were clear that the chains of economic slavery could be just as intense as their physical counterparts. Now, what does that event in 1963 have to do with the 10-year-old boy from the Dominican Republic? So in 1987, through the Big Brothers program, I was matched with a 10-year-old boy named David, who lived in what was then the most heavily photographed crime scene in New York City, which, if anyone was in an urban area in the 80s, it was the height of the crack AIDS epidemic and literally ravaged urban communities around this country. David was incredibly smart, talented, hungry, motivated, yet what he lacked was the opportunity to realize his God-given potential. And so what you saw were things like zip code, bank balance of his mom, the color of his skin, and the school system he attended were limiting his potential. And you say, well, what does that look like? I remember being David's parent on Parents' Night because his mom didn't speak English. So I went to PS 156 in Lower East Side of Manhattan and said, hi, I'm David's dad. I'm here to hear how my son is doing. And the teacher looked up, scratched his head, and said, David, 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 which one is he? And so that doesn't define educational inequality in America. Nothing does. Here's David today, a few years ago. He's a college graduate. He's a homeowner. He's got 3 beautiful, healthy children. His wife is going for a master's degree. He runs his own animation business. Ever since I knew David, he loved to draw. He now runs his own animation company. He just raised $22,000 on Kickstarter to create a new Latino animation series for children. David has lived effectively what we would want all of our children to live, which is a true shot at the American dream, an opportunity to just realize his potential. He was never looking for a handout. He was looking for a hand up, and it's been a good fortune for myself and my family to be part of David's family for the last 25 plus years and to support him on that journey. And it was David and the inspiration he provided that led me to conclude that the challenge facing young adults was not just David and the power of one in Manhattan. It was a much broader challenge in this society that we're facing. Here's Wilfredo. Wilfredo in that picture was in his teens. He came here from El Salvador. At a time when growing up in El Salvador, you were dodging bullets to stay alive. And should you have gone to school, your teachers were now unfortunately being killed, and therefore you missed significant parts of your education. I want you to keep Will in mind, because we're going to come back to him in a few moments. Because if you look at the situation David faced in this country, you look at the situation that Will faced when he came to this country, it has been a pretty bleak scenario in the past decade for what's happening to young adults across America, like Will. So this chart tells you the level of youth employment in America. What percentage of youth are employed across this country? We started keeping records for this in 1948. And if you take a look at that graph, you see what those numbers show today. The lowest level of youth unemployment since we started keeping records in 1948. That's resulted now in 6.7 million young people, 16 to 24-year-olds, who are called disconnected. That's, we believe, a pejorative term. Would prefer to use the word opportunity youth rather than disconnected youth. Because young people like David and Will did nothing to disconnect themselves. They were born unconnected in a society where connections and access and opportunity matter deeply. This represents almost 1 out of 5 young people in America today. So now we sit in this conference thinking about reform of education, technology and education. You think about who must we be conscious of as we think about these innovations. Well, I'd argue it's hard to run a society or a democracy if you're going to mortgage 1 out of 5 young people who are effectively out of school, out of work, and don't have more than a high school degree in America today. That's what's level of disconnection we now experience. You can easily argue this is an issue of moral justice, of social justice, but I would say it's in our own motivated self-interest as well. The cost of disconnection, the cost of the young people in this country who aren't connected into education and work is now estimated at $1.6 trillion. When we're thinking about how to fix this country, we're thinking about big numbers, macroeconomic picture. 1.6 trillion is a big number. The annual cost is about $100 billion. Lost tax revenue, increased healthcare costs, increased adjudication and prison costs, lost opportunity cost for what's called opportunity youth. And it's amazing that at the same time you've got these 6.7 million young people who are disconnected, you've got businesses with on average 3.4 million job vacancies in this country. And most businesses, when surveyed, would said, we can't find the skilled labor we need. So here in Phoenix, we work with American Express. They said, we cannot find people to fill our workforce today in Phoenix who have middle skills, the attitudes, behaviors we need. So at the same time, you got 6.7 million young people, supply of labor. You got every month since the recession happened in this country, more than 3 million open job vacancies, employers taking longer to fill the open job vacancy than ever before, and their belief that this is going to get worse rather than better. They can't find skilled labor in this country. And that mismatch of supply and demand is where we see a tremendous opportunity in bringing together those two to say, how can those young people receive the education and the experience they need to actually supply businesses in this country with what they need? And that was really the vision behind creating this program called Year Up, is how to bring together supply and demand in a pretty powerful way for young people who have been disconnected. And the way we do that is young people come for 6 months in our programs around the country to a college-credited experience. We articulate with community colleges around the country 6 months of training in 2 things. One are called ABCs, attitudinal, behavioral, and communication skills. The other are something marketable. So what does business need? Technical skills, financial skills, project management skills. So that young adult comes for 6 months into a program where they're going to school full-time, learning how to be a professional, and then learning something the market will pay you for. After that 6 months, they take those experience, that college credit, they go to an internship with one of 250 companies across the country. From Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, eBay, through to Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, the White House, NASA, hospitals, you name it, Coca-Cola, GE. And they become interns, paid interns for 6 months. At the end of that 6 months, those companies can hire whoever they want to hire. But in addition to that education experience, those young people get a heck of a lot of support. If you think about our average student has 3 barriers when they come to the front door. That's former homelessness, past adjudication, coming right out of foster care, plus, all the barriers young people face in isolated pockets of poverty in this country. So there's a lot of support, social work support, advisory support. But at the same time, those students sign a contract that spells out expectations and consequences not meeting expectations. So if you're 1 second late to our program, you're going to lose $30 of a stipend that you would have earned that day. So we have young people running down the street to get there on time, which is what Goldman Sachs would expect, which is what Google would expect. So we're creating a professional learning environment from day one where a young person says, thank you for setting the bar high, thank you for telling me the structure of professional environments, and I can achieve that if you help me to learn and acquire those attitudes and behaviors consistent with the job at a Fortune 1000 company. That model we've now run consistently for the past 13 years, served from 22 students in our first class to now we serve about 8,000 students by the end of this year in 11 cities across the country. And lo and behold, what have you proved? If you give a young person an opportunity, they will run to it. They will seize it. They will hit every high bar you could set. And 84% of those young people are either in school full-time or employed within 4 months of graduation. This is a population which we all know the statistics for are failing significantly to achieve post-secondary success as well as what I call pay-worthy activities. Now, think about yourselves, and probably 95% of the people at this conference. If I asked you all, did you get a college degree? Do you have a college degree? I bet most people would raise their hands. If I then said, did you get that degree between the ages of 18 and 22, I'm guessing most people would also nod their heads as well. That you consumed higher education between the ages of 18 and 22 and you have a 4-year degree. Probably 90% of the people in this conference would say yes to those two questions. Let me ask you though, if you asked 100 adults across America, do you have a college degree and did you get it between the ages of 18 and 22, how many out of 100 adults would say yes to those two questions, do you think? What would you guess? 22? Anyone else? 50? 25? So only 8 adults in this country out of every 100 has a college degree that they got between the ages of 18 and 22. Yet when we think about higher education, higher ed reform, we think about it linearly. You go to college, you go to work. That in no way, shape, or form meets the needs of America today. Half the people who go to college work full-time in America. Imagine that. Half the people who go to college work full-time in this country. And so what we've been trying to do is how do you combine pay-worthy and credit-worthy activities in the same way so that someone who is very low income can get a certificate, a degree, a advanced degree, whilst they're also feeding themselves and their families. That is the majority of the people in this country today. So you think about how we're going to serve that population and create the knowledge-based economy we're going to need. It's paying attention to that certainly as well. Our students on average earn $30,000 a year for a single person. That's 3 times the poverty level in this country. We've now done the randomized controlled trials, the causality studies to prove that this works and it's not just correlated, that it's actually causal. And with that model, we've scaled since we started across the country and probably be coming to Phoenix. Now, remember I talked to you about Will. Well, here's Will today. He's now about 34 years old, 35 years old. He did his internship at Fidelity Investments. He graduated and Fidelity hired him. He was a great worker. He has been there since 2002. He makes about $85,000 a year. He has bought not 1, but 2 homes, one of which he rents out, one of which he lives in with his cousin Douglas, who also went through our program. He graduated from college with a 3.5 GPA while he was continuing his work at Fidelity. He's also the president of a local foundation in Boston that serves El Salvadorian children with special needs. You think about what this country needs to do to ensure that Will, who came here from El Salvador, or David, who grew up in the most heavily photographed crime scene in New York City, how we need to think about combining post-secondary education and work to allow folks to be the economic assets that they are, which is critical. Now, this picture is also the first house that Will bought. So my best day is when I get a photo from a graduate who says, take a look at this. All right, here's a home I bought. And in fact, when you hear a young person who grew up in foster care or in shelters talk to you about what it means to carry their child across their threshold, or what it means to cook dinner in your kitchen, how palpable that is when a young person describes to you what that feels like, to know that they will bring their child up with security and safety. Probably no better days in my life. Problem is, though, is Europe is an anecdote, right? It serves a couple thousand people a year now. That number is 6.7 million young people who are disconnected. So what we've done the last 3 years is shifted our entire strategy and said we're going to take what we do and move it into community colleges and other institutions of higher education. That could be everyone from an Apollo or a Phoenix through to City College of San Francisco or Miami-Dade College. In fact, we now operate within Miami-Dade College and created what we're now calling Professional Training Corps. So you're familiar with ROTC? That serves 100,000 Americans today. You go to Georgetown, you sign up for ROTC, you take extra classes, you wear a uniform, you do field training exercises, you study military maneuvers. Well, imagine taking the analog for that and putting it in community colleges and say swap fatigues for business attire, swap studying military moves for learning about Microsoft mouse moves, and don't go on that field training exercise, go on an internship. And create a cadre of young people who are coming to community colleges ready to learn, ready to be professional with very high standards in going into the workforce, both connected to labor markets and with the attitudes and behaviors they need to be successful in a knowledge-based economy. We do that now in Miami and Baltimore. We're opening up in Philadelphia. If we were to come to Phoenix, we'd do that here with a community college in Phoenix. And actually working with that community college system in a much more integrated fashion, or indeed someone like Apollo who has equally said, why don't you come do this with us, as well as community college system. I've got a short video to show you about that, which should be able to play in just one sec. Were you able to tee that up? So Kai grew up in East Baltimore. I don't know if anyone's ever been to East Baltimore, but take a ride through East Baltimore, and I defy you to walk out of there and not have your life changed. It is perhaps one of the most startling pictures of decay in this country. You would say, I'm now in a war zone. And the question is, truly, is he someone else's child? Or is he our child? We think about for whom we're responsible. He's now working at Radio 1 as a technician. But if you saw his prospects from his vantage point in the bounded rationality of growing up in an inner city isolated pocket of poverty, you think we might have just wasted that young man's talent. And all we did is say, we'll give you a hand up, not a handout. Ty did not want a handout, certainly what he wanted. And I think as I look around the country, many of the young adults we've served, they are that economic asset that this country needs to be competitive, to be globally competitive. And it's, I think, the potential within our institutions of higher education, our community colleges, to say, how do we ensure that the Kai Smiths of this world do give our country what they have to offer? I'll close with this photo, and if there are any questions, be happy to answer them. Every year we do a march across the country, thousands of people who march for opportunity. In Wall Street, we march from where David grew up, which is still a pretty tough area, to Wall Street. And in about a mile, you walk across the opportunity divide. You walk from no opportunity to the epicenter of the financial world. You can walk across the divide in this country. In Washington, we obviously walk in some pretty hallowed ground on the Mall. And this is last year's walk, a group of our young adults. The vast majority now work at Freddie Mac, in the federal government, in tech firms, in hospitals, doing jobs that we need done, that are professional jobs, that pay livable wages, and enable us young people to contribute the way they want to contribute as taxpayers, homeowners, great parents, and role models in their community. And so as we think for us about being at a conference like this, we work every day to say how technology can help us to better serve our young adults and not to be left on a digital sidewalk as we continue to invest in the education and the pedagogy our young adults receive. But it is all of our opportunity to say that that picture, that opportunity is realized for those young people. And I tell you, we all benefit as a result, for sure. So let me close there and see if folks have any questions or comments. I'd be happy to take them. Yes?
Clearly we know that higher ed is failing many Americans, that it is not preparing them for the workforce. And so through your model at Europe, I was curious how you look at alternative assessments and specifically badges.
So our students, when they graduate, get a certificate. Typically, we craft that with the community college or the college we work with. In most states, we work with a community college. Some states, the unions are not amenable to this type of partnership, which is not a good situation. But they'll get a certificate, which is a marketable, stackable credential. It'll lead to the AA degree. In Miami, our students earn a full year of college credit and a certificate. So part of our job is to package things in a way that they can actually have market value, and use. We're not, so things like developmental ed. 96% of our students test into developmental education. We don't believe that the best way to solve math remediation is to take an even more boring course of Algebra 1, but to actually combine tutoring in developmental ed with a credit-bearing course concomitantly. That's worked really well for us, rather than saying repeat Algebra 1. If you don't pass Algebra 1, you don't earn the credit. So we're trying to take developmental ed and combine it with credit-bearing. We also don't, our assessment, we're really careful in assessing students on the front end. You know, we look for motivation primarily. You know, our average GPA is probably 1 point something.
Sure.
So we don't use a lot of kind of standardized assessments.
Well, no, I guess that was my question about alternative assessments and competency-based assessments.
Yeah,
and
it's all rubrics-based. All of our assessments are rubrics-based around attitude and behavior, as well as how they're doing on their actual practicums, demonstrating what they've learned, giving presentations. So it's more of an experiential demonstrated process rather than a strict testing process. Any other comments, thoughts, questions? Yes. So we do all the work with employers. Typically, often our institutions of higher ed are not that responsive to employer need. So we go straight to Google or Wells Fargo, American Express, and say, what do you need in the middle skill job category? And so Google said, we actually need quality assurance testers. Or State Street said, we need fund accountants. This is 30% of the labor market of these middle skill jobs. And college graduates actually don't want that job because it pays $32,000 a year. And they are leaving in such record numbers that it's a big cost to those businesses. So what we sell to the business is we're a labor supply chain, drawing on talent within your community, and we'll be held accountable for results. So if you're not happy, we generate $30-odd million a year through our internship program. But if the companies aren't happy, we go out of business real quickly. So unlike most nonprofits, if we don't please the Amexes of this world, we would literally be out of business in a matter of months, which is the way nonprofits should operate. They shouldn't be efforts-based. They should be outcomes-based. And funding shouldn't flow to efforts. It should flow to results, just like it would in the private sector. So, yeah, so we think our probably unique position is we work with 250 companies today, whether we have a GSA approval so we can go straight to the federal government, that we understand the needs of business. Most of us worked in both profit and nonprofit sectors in our lives and are able to tailor what we do to meet the needs and respond to the needs of business in a way that most higher ed institutions are not demand-led in the way that I would argue they need to be to satisfy a rapidly changing demand for different skills in this economy. Right. Yeah, so students pay $0, and they also earn a stipend of somewhere between $100 and $200 a week on average, because they're at such an income level that they could never afford to go to school full-time. They have to eat while they're actually feeding their brains. So without some sort of stipend, 20% of our students are parents already themselves. So you've got to have some level of support for that young person as well. And this is probably the best opportunity we could offer to them, but it's highly, highly accountable. So that if a young person doesn't adhere to those expectations, they will fire themselves from the program, and that's their choice, not ours. So we're really trying to shift accountability and responsibility onto the individual rather than be the authority figures ourselves. And young people respond every day, thank you for holding us accountable. Community colleges in this country generally don't think about attitude and behavior in the classroom. I don't feel a right to talk about attitude and behavior. Whereas you walk by one of our classrooms in Baltimore City Community College, our students are all dressed professionally. They're really practicing good learning, kind of professional learning behaviors. The other teachers are walking by saying, what is going on in that classroom? And the students just say, you just expected me to do this. Often we don't expect our children or our young people to hit the standards that we would expect for our own children. And so I think by fundamentally just expecting more, students say thank you. They say, appreciate you telling me what it really takes to succeed, and we're more than happy to hit, if not exceed, those expectations. So I think there's a role to expand this attitudinally within a community college to actually set a standard that I promise you most students would welcome and thank us for setting that standard for them. Mm-hmm.
They're just not motivated to stay in school long enough to get to community
Right.
college.
So 20% of our students have a GED. We see a slight increase in their decrease in their retention, but not markedly so. Once they get the GED, we can then put them in college. So we want to back this program into GED programs in such a way that, so you get your GED, you can now apply for year up. We'll go through all the hassle of making sure you're dual enrolled at the community college and earning college credit. So it's trying to create an incentive for GED, which doesn't have a great deal of currency in today's labor markets. Yes, sir. So we work with corporate partners, educational partners, technology partners. You know, in California, we had an organization who helped us for students who are very advanced technically to study Linux, Apache, MySQL, Python. It's called the LAMP stack. We had several students just burst ahead and take more because they were that advanced. We have to create the online and the low-cost way for them to do that rather than just throw teaching content at it. So online providers of courseware who are willing to provide that to nonprofits is one we're talking to folks here as well. We also have 4,000 or 5,000 volunteers a year. So we have mentors for every student, speakers for students. So we, in our 12 cities, consume a lot of volunteer effort as well across the country. Yes. Yep. Great. I'd love to speak with you. Yes. Yeah, I do pretty well. Yeah. So Rick, I know he's been supportive of the program and mentored students as well. Yeah. Yep. Jimmy was known for a lot of years. So I will end there. Thanks very much for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. And I know we just wrote a book that's going to be number 8 on the New York Times bestseller, and I'm going to give away and sign any copies if anyone wanted that. So thanks so much and wish you well.